Hello and welcome to the August 2019 Sunshine Summit. My name is Heather and I am your host. This week, in association with Geeks Rising, I'm bringing to you a week of live streams to recognise and celebrate connections. Today is day 3. We've been joined by a couple of groups of guests already and we have more along the way. But today I'm very excited to share and celebrate connections with Ben Brown, who is a fellow Geeks Rising Podcast Network member and is the host of the Tourette's podcast. Welcome to the Sunshine Summit, Ben.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are most welcome. It's exciting to actually finally meet you. We've got to have a chat in the Geeks Rising voice chat before today, but welcome first to Geeks Rising, and it's very awesome to be connected with you.
Yeah. Geeks Rising has been great. The level of support has been cool. There's been new audience members, people who have nothing to do with Tourette syndrome who are listening now, and that makes me happy.
Cool. We also have some amazing people who've already popped into the live chat. This is a live stream, but no worries if you can't make it live. They are available to watch as replays. But in the chat, we've got Tim, we've got Anna Christine, Finn R, and Mark, and Naya Real. I'm not sure if I pronounced that properly, but hello, everybody. While you're here in the live chat, everyone, if you have stories of connections that you've made with Ben or through Tourette's podcast or on your own journeys, I'd love for you to share them or to ask questions. Ben's done an amazing job of sharing this event in his segment and kind of encouraging everyone to get involved. So please do that. That's what this is all about. How we connected goes back to Bandrew. He's been a lot of connection starting points for me and through Geeks Rising as well. But I'm not sure whether it was you when you connected with him, because I connected with him back in 2017.
It was maybe around that time, maybe a little bit later. I was listening to, I found his videos online, the podcastage videos. And for anybody listening who doesn't know or watching who doesn't know, he reviews microphones, and he's reviewed a trillion of them by now. And he buys them with his own money. And it's just, I really liked his integrity in the way he reviewed microphones, including this one, the SM7B. And which I think is his favorite one. And I found out about his podcast that he does called Bandrew Says, and it's tech news, but it was done in a really interesting way. He passes along a lot of, I guess, useful info when it comes to cybersecurity and being safe online. And, so I eventually started writing in to, ask questions on his podcast. And we just started interacting, talking about music, and we had a lot of, I guess, common things in our background, including a love for podcasting. So we kept the communication going, and eventually we talked about Geeks Rising for its there's a focus on awareness and advocacy and well-being and education, and Tourette's podcast fit right in with that.
Yeah. So I think I connected with you through maybe one of the questions that you asked in the Ask Andrew segment, but as I was prepping for yesterday's segment with Curran, I remembered that I'd actually listened to your episode with him. And I remember going through that, and I shared that story yesterday about how the cathedral pipes germ was in your signal chain, and I was excited about it, and then how that fell through. And there was a
they
connection.
left you hanging.
Yeah. But after that, when Banjo, I think he had recommended your show, and then when he suggested for you to become a part of Geeks Rising, it was really exciting. It was very, very cool to have another podcast, because what I like to do through my show, which is Sunshine and PowerCuts, is I like to shine a light on, through the Sunshine Summit more specifically, shine a light on people and their creations and the connections they've made. But you do that through the Tourette's podcast, by shining a light on Tourette's, raising awareness for it, and offering this safe space for people to share their stories and build a community around it. And I just think that is incredible.
Well, yeah, it's helped me out as much as anybody who listens, and I don't want that to sound pretentious or anything, but there are people who've written in who say that they've never talked openly about having Tourette syndrome before. Then they listen to the podcast and I guess heard some things that they don't typically hear. There's a focus on the adult population with TS. A lot of the stuff you see out there is focused towards children, and a great percentage of it should be. Educating parents, making sure kids feel comfortable with what they have. But there has been I guess, kind of a feeling that there hasn't been much support for adults out there, or much of a conversation besides, groups on Facebook, that kind of thing, which are great, which are fantastic. But the podcast was just a fun idea, to where I have Tourette syndrome. I was diagnosed when I was a kid, and I still deal with it as an adult, and some of the comorbidities that come with it. But before the podcast, I was not open to talking about it. I was embarrassed by it, didn't want to talk about it at all. Podcasting was in my skill set, and I wanted to connect with other people. It made sense to do that, have more security in my life and feel better about myself. And so the podcast itself and talking to other people and making those connections gave me the confidence and courage to talk openly about it and tick openly at the office, out in public. People don't care as much as I'd worried. So my Tourette syndrome, I guess, is what some people would describe as mild or mild plus. I'll have sort of tick fits and things like that, and you'll see them probably while you're talking, and I'm kind of like waiting to respond, because that's just like a little nervous response to it. But yeah, it doesn't bother me like it used to, and it's all because of the podcast and the connections that I've made on it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Naya, if I pronounce your name wrong, but I think she's in the chat, and she said the podcast has really helped me talk to my friends about my Tourette's, and that's awesome. I think that's
so cool.
Yeah. Feeling like you're a part of something supportive and being able to be open and build that confidence in yourself is huge. Absolutely huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's absolutely what it was. Again, with me, huge insecurity, was always worried about what people were thinking. Were they, I was masking my tics and finding ways to cover them up so they didn't look quite like conspicuous tics. Don't care about that anymore. It makes it easier to talk with people about it. And I think just having a podcast too facilitates a conversation too. It's something out there that's being talked about and being exercised. And, but it helps my confidence like crazy.
Yeah. The other thing is being able to hear from people in their own words what their experiences are, and they can hear that through your show. Finn in the chat said that I used to hide away from people because my tics are so bad. I have swearing tics and live in a highly religious household, but after watching Ben's podcast, it gave me so much confidence to tick proudly. That is awesome.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that. Absolutely love that. Well, yeah, would love to talk more about that too.
Yeah. So in that, your podcast runs in seasons, and I think you're coming up to season 4 soon. How do you make the connections to bring people on to share their stories for the show?
A lot of it is really just social media. Initially, I think me reaching out to people, and then once the podcast, I guess, kind of established itself, requests were coming in, and they've been coming in at a rate that it outnumbers the allotments that I have for the seasons. But for season 4, I'm going to try to do about 16 episodes, and those are already spoken for. Those were already planned out. I've done some of the interviews already. I'm going to do some more next week, but you'll see it launch in, I think, early September. But yeah, initially, I kind of thought it was weird that, I mean, like, admittedly, like, starting the Twitter account before the podcast started just to kind of explore it and see who might be into it. I was certain I would get shot down left and right because I'm a total stranger in the, as far as anybody's concerned. I mean, I'm reaching out saying that I have a podcast about Tourette syndrome and I'm claiming to have it. Then I'm asking you to come on with me and talk about really intimate details of your life and, medical stuff and just things that I have no business asking. So I was sure that I would get the door slammed in my face, but it was a really nice, quick response. That was through Twitter messages, essentially. And at this point, I mean, people reach out by Instagram, email, all that. So a lot of it's coming my way now, which has been really nice. And I sometimes ask people how they found the podcast or how they figured it out. And a lot of it's just by word of mouth or just going to Google to see if something like this exists. And that's really, really cool that people are just kind of like organically going out to see if something like this might be out there. And which I guess makes me nervous too and puts a lot of pressure on me. But but yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, but you have your intent is genuine, and you definitely want to help and support other people. So that radiates through what you do and makes that connection possible, I believe. Like, now there is something for people to find when they go searching for a Tourette's podcast. There is something for people to listen to because you've created it. And the social media thing, you do an incredible job, particularly on Twitter, of following hashtags and the relevant organizations and things and interacting and sharing, retweeting things to kind of keep the conversation going and bringing awareness to what dialogue and discussions are happening out there in one place on your Twitter feed that people can catch up with and follow.
Yeah, it's cool. And this came way too late, but during season 3, started tourettespodcast.com as well to post, blog posts, and there are guest blog posts now so kind of as an interim thing to continue the conversation, like you were saying. tourettespodcast.com has people who are writing pieces for it now, which is really cool. If anybody out there is interested and likes to write and has a story to tell or an angle on TS, feel free to contact me, tourettespodcast@gmail.com. But yeah, it's been really nice. And that's been a great way to connect with the other Tourette advocacy organizations in different countries, from the US to Canada to the UK to Australia, South America, Indonesia. Again, the podcast started in the beginning of 2018. Like, none of this was happening in terms of just my daily conversations. I didn't talk about TS with anybody. And now it's basically, I mean, it takes up a good portion of my day, happily. So yeah. Social media has been a fantastic way to reach people.
How did you find finding those connections on Twitter, like the advocacy organizations? Are they easy to search for to be able to connect with them?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you go to Twitter, type in the word Tourette, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that comes up. Sometimes you'll find stuff that is a total mismatch. It's somebody, using that as a joke or something like that, a joke handle. But yeah, I mean, everybody's pretty accessible. Google, I mean, if you type in Tourette, I think the Tourette Association of America is probably the first thing that comes up. And even from that website, there are links to other Tourette advocacy organizations around the world too.
Mm-hmm. I love that you sort of consolidate that and share so much so that we can find it in one place, especially now that I've connected with your show. It's kind of like a one-stop shop that makes it easier to connect with those things. Chris Parsons is in the chat and said, "This is an awesome format. Thanks so much for putting this on and sharing your experiences." That's awesome.
Thank you, thanks. Here. I appreciate that. Yeah.
And we've also got Jade. Ivana is here. Yay. In the chat.
Oh, hey, Jade. How you doing?
Welcome. And we've got Anthony, and he said, sharing your story and others' personal stories can bring strength to the entire community. That's an epic accomplishment.
Yeah. So recently I do a lot of photography, and there's a YouTube channel I watch. It's associated with a website. It's called F-Stoppers. And they post photography news and videos and tutorials and that kind of thing. And one of the two main guys who usually does the videos, just recently, I guess he's been kind of showing up less and less on the YouTube page. And he posted an update talking about what he had been through. And you could tell he was nervous talking about it, but he has Crohn's disease. And he went into detail about it and said, this is what I'm up against, and I need to take some time away. And, it's just the the level of honesty that he put forward had to mean something to other people who were also going through the same thing. And so it just really resonated with me with Tourette's podcast and how I've benefited just from hearing other people or talking to other people who have that common background. And I mean, the word isolation is something that comes up all the time in communications I have. And people just say it makes them feel less isolated just from the simple act of talking about it or hearing other people talk about something that they can relate to and maybe otherwise have a difficulty finding that connection with other people in their daily life. So yeah, it's been nice.
Yeah. So they can hear and listen to those through the podcast. And then you have the Tourette's podcast discussion group on Facebook where they can come together and connect after while they're not listening to the show. And what I love about that is everyone is warmly welcomed to the group. And then there are places where they can bring up what's happening for them or, comment on things. And it's a really nice place there. The eldest bro said, I do like the F-stoppers, lots of really good help. So he's caught that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Great channel.
Yeah, and Jade said, good, Ben, thanks. I love this so much. So I'm glad you're enjoying it, Jade, so far.
Yeah, glad you're here, Jade.
Yeah, just to recap, if anyone in the live chat has questions for Ben as we go along, do let us know or share your experiences with the Tourette's podcast or with Tourette's or anything along the way. That would be really cool. On this journey, you had a bit of an audio background before, and I know that you've shared this in other places. You actually had a really cool conversation with Logan Norgal, who is the host of Conversations with Creators, who's another member of Geeks Rising. So I'd really love everyone to check out that episode if they haven't already. But photography is one of your things, but audio is kind of part of your background. And I was wondering if you could kind of share some of those connection stories with us.
Yeah, sure. So music has always been kind of a part of my family history, I guess, or at least for my immediate family. My dad played music way back in the day. My mom, same thing. I guess kind of the arts have always been sort of a thing with us. My sister is a session musician. And so the first thing they gave me was a violin, which I didn't like. Because it was a discipline. It wasn't really me being creative with it and kind of figuring it out. It was a discipline of learning how to read music and going to lessons at a routine time. And you had to practice at home. And it didn't feel like something I was really connecting with. It felt more like school. And I wanted something that was going to be creative and fun. And so my dad, he had a guitar and I would sneak into his closet and I would take out the guitar and I would play it. And knock it out of tune and everything. And he eventually bought me my own little electric guitar. And I still have the amp that he bought me along with it. So this would have been 1992, maybe. I was 12 years old. And so that really clicked with me. And I wanted to start a band and I wanted to play rock music and then punk music. And it just, the level of, I don't know, it's just being able to express yourself in a really artistic way where I think sort of chaos and disorder were a little bit more in tune with guitar playing versus a discipline, because I wasn't going for any technical pursuits. I just wanted to play loud rock music and the Trogs and Wild Thing and stuff like that. And that led to an interest in wanting to record, when I'm playing with bands. And because recording can be expensive, we recorded a lot of stuff ourselves with a little Tascam 4-track recorder, a little tape, and every single time I did it, because it would sound horrible, and every time I did it, I would learn something new of like, oh, this is why it sounded horrible before. Okay, let me try this next little trick, and this was also still mid-90s. There wasn't a whole lot of information online or anything like that, so a lot of it was just self-teaching and observation, and I toured with bands for a while, but when it came time to get a real job, I guess you could say, was around 2006, and I went into journalism. That was kind of my background, was writing as well, and the whole audio side of it was just a hobby. That was just something on the side, music, and getting into journalism also led me into radio journalism, which I did for a while. And so that got me, I guess, more educated about the kinds of mics that were being used. Like this mic in particular is a classic radio station mic, as is this one. This is the Electro Voice RE20, which I mostly use. But when podcasting was really starting to kind of become a thing, I was listening to them. I wasn't doing them yet, but I was enjoying it, enjoying the act of it. And one of the newspapers I worked for after I got done with the radio side of things wanted to start a podcast. So this was like a roundtable news discussion type thing, political news.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounded okay, but it got the job done. It sounded good. And there were a lot of podcasts out there where I think at the time period, pristine quality was not yet quite the standard.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that we all kind of had to get to. But concurrently with Tourette syndrome kind of swimming in my mind, that's when I was like, maybe I can, this whole thing I've been thinking about doing for a while, a podcast about Tourette syndrome, like maybe I can kind of, converge these things. And that's been fun. And sort of what I do for my career now is all multimedia in general, which is audio, video, photography, podcasting, all that stuff. So the music background, everything is kind of one big thing now for me.
That's awesome. I love that you have that journey, and it's really interesting about the different types of music and learning violin and how different that was, and then sort of the flexibility with playing guitar, and then the background that you have with audio. And I think it's interesting because we talked to Chris yesterday, and audio quality is really important to Chris, and there have been comments that you sound good, and you do, and you put out a good sounding podcast. So thank you for the learning and all of that thing that you've put into making a good quality podcast.
Oh, thanks. I hope I sound good tonight. I'm looking at my levels and I think I'm peaking out a little bit. So do I sound distorted? Am I good to go or clear?
I think you sound good. Let us know in the chat if anyone has any issues. But yeah.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Naya in the chat. What tics do you have now or most often since you're an adult?
Most often, so I do have a vocal tic. You might have been hearing me do a little bit off mic where it sounds kind of like, sort of like that. I used to combine that with a cough to kind of mask it and make it sound a little bit more normal. But that's a tic I've had for, sometimes it goes away and I'll say bye to it for a year, then it comes back. But this is the longest running tic I've ever had, was this vocal tic.
Mm-hmm.
Eye blinking, kind of head jerking. I kind of strain my neck muscles, which tends to get painful after a while, but I'll tense them really quickly, kind of like that. I usually have to stop talking when I do that because it kind of jitters my voice. I have this tic in my left ear where I didn't know what the anatomy of this was until somebody explained it to me, what I was actually doing, but I pop my ears. So as it's been explained to me, I move the eustachian tubes inside my ears, which I guess is kind of like a coveted skill for scuba divers. And so it's something that you kind of have to learn. And I just do it by a tic. And I probably do it hundreds to 1,000 times a day.
Wow.
Apparently not doing myself hearing damage according to my last doctor visit, but I have a tic right. I sort of stiffen my lower back at the base of my spine, which can also be kind of painful. I have weird breathing tics, which come out at really inopportune times, like if I'm mowing the lawn or if I'm jogging, or it really throws me off and makes it difficult for me because I'm an asthmatic as well. So I have to keep my relief inhaler with me.
Mm-hmm.
And this is asthma exacerbated by tics. I sort of curl my toes up a lot, and that's just kind of like a benign tic, but there are probably 10 to 20 others that I'm not really, that they kind of come and go and new tics develop all the time. But those are I guess the standard ones in my adult life.
Yeah. Jade has a question. Ben, for those who are not familiar with TS, can you speak to coprolalia? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Coprolalia?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's typically what people are talking about when they say, like the swearing disease, and I'm putting that in quotes. It tends to be one of the more, I guess, sensational aspects of Tourette syndrome when it comes to what media producers, TV producers, content creators might want to focus on, because it's I guess more provocative, and so that's why that's typically what the portrayal is when you see it on TV or in movies, and then that's led to the parody and all that. But I mean, it's a real thing that people really have to deal with, and it can be really difficult. But it's I guess the numbers kind of vary, and I've heard that this number might be low. It's maybe 10 to 15% of people who have Tourette syndrome also experience coprolalia. I never have personally.
Okay.
I will have, I'll have vocal tics that kind of, if they're not a word, it's something that sounds like a word that I'll do, but there's still an urge to kind of do that, and there's some mystery behind it. And I'm definitely not a TS expert from the science side of it, but and I am lucky to have associated myself with some very great TS scientists who've been, I guess, pitching in with the podcast, so I can kind of keep things accurate and straight. But yeah, that's generally why people know that aspect of TS more than the variety that it really is.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I mean, I have not had experience with TS in my personal life. The thing that I have seen is what's being portrayed in media, and I don't follow that too closely. I don't watch a lot of TV, but I have seen it in reality TV shows or something where it's been featured somewhere, or if it's a spark piece or something that to get kind of negative attention towards it, I feel. And I don't think personally, and I think there's a lot of room of awareness to what actually is involved and how taxing it can be on your body and all of the other things that TS could do. And I'm glad that it's not impacting your hearing, because that good to keep a track of that and make sure it's not. Yeah. So it's amazing that you're raising awareness for that. That's really cool that you have access to some experts to help with it. But you do make the disclaimer that it is not a medical diagnosis show. It's not like that's not what you're doing because you're not the expert person. You're just sharing the stories.
Yeah. Because that's the whole thing. My background, kind of hiding it away for, childhood into, well, I would say adolescence into adult life. I kind of forces me to not be an expert on it, except for what I've been through myself. So that's what I always say. Not a science expert, not a medical expert, not licensed or certified for anything. But I do know my own experiences, and I want to talk about them with other people who might know where I'm coming from. And that's the whole point of the podcast. And I will say one more thing about coprolalia that the podcast has really helped me kind of address. One thing that I've seen within the Tourette community, and you hear it a lot, is that if someone is kind of open to talking about Tourette syndrome, they'll say something like, yeah, I have TS, but not the swearing kind. Almost like you don't have to worry about it. Which is really kind of, it's offensive to people who do deal with it. I think it's kind of inconsiderate. I think it's marginalizing. And but I don't think that's the intention when people with TS do that. I think they just kind of use it to explain sort of, like I have TS, I don't have the swearing kind, but just whatever they want to imply by that. But I don't think anybody means to be hurtful by doing it. But it's something that I think I used to do in the rare times that I would talk about it with people. And I think it was virtually right before I started this podcast, and I was going through all kinds of mental exercises and kind of thinking about what the narrative was going to be and what I wanted to get out of it. And I just really started thinking about that. And I think it was the third episode of the first season where that came up with a guest named Melissa C. Water, who does experience coprolalia. And she's amazing. We talked about that, and it kind of raised something for me, and a new awareness for me being part of the TS community. Yet there are some things that I was doing unwittingly that might have been offensive, like separating myself from anyone who experiences coprolalia. So that's something I've heard feedback from a lot of people listening to, saying that, yeah, I was doing the same thing. It never even occurred to me that might be offensive. And that feels really good as far as the podcast goes, that I've not only, I guess, improved the way that I think about it, but there are other people who've said they've done the same thing, which is really nice.
Yeah. I think that, like, from a non-TS person's point of view, I think there's, like I said, a lot more awareness that could be raised. And I imagine that going through your journey as well, for all of you and everyone, there's a whole learning journey that goes along with how to talk about it, or what way to describe it or something. And coming and having the opportunity to hear from other people and how they've gone through it and learning from that, sharing those experiences is just a huge resource pool that you've brought together of everybody.
Yeah. No, it's been amazing. I'm still kind of blown away by it every day. And I'm learning something new all the time too. Every conversation I have with somebody, there's something new that I take away from it.
Yeah. Naya said before everyone knew that you had TS, like when you were young, if someone sprung up a question like, why do you do that, or what did you do? Because she just shut down and tried to change the subject.
Yeah. So when I was young, when I was diagnosed, it was around 1985 or 1986. So some people knew what TS was, but there wasn't this sort of grand, I wasn't aware, at least, of kind of a walking knowledge of what TS was, or even that the stereotype was out there. And I guess when I was diagnosed, it was just a new fact of my life, and I didn't really have much of a frame of reference. So it didn't really impact me too much, except for just knowing that this is why I do what I do, and this is why I jerk my head. This is why I never sleep. This is why just all the symptoms had an explanation. So being 5 or 6, whatever version of mentality I had on that at the time. So I went to a really small private school growing up. And it was the same. It was mostly the same kids year after year. So first grade, they already knew I had something like that. Second grade, third grade, I was in the newspaper at one point for being the kid on the block with Tourette syndrome. And it's a photo of me like shooting a basketball or something. And so, I mean, word was out. And then I changed schools when I was in 6th grade. So I was like 11 or 12 or something. And so I went to public school. And it was around that time when I was noticing that people were making fun of TS, that it was a joke, that it was the kind of thing that you would see in sketch comedy or stand-up routines or in movies where people make fun of it. And so going into public school and being in a much more populated environment, I shut down too. And that's right when I made the decision that like, I'm not going to let anybody know I have this, like, because it felt like it would just be the end of the road for me socially. And so I bottled it up and just decided to not talk about it. And that was going to be my policy. And again, that didn't change until like 2018.
Yeah. Do you feel like there are more conversations happening now? Like there is is it Treating Tourette's Together summit that you're doing later this week?
Yeah, there's a summit coming up. That's right. So, yeah, I'm going to leave Friday for that. That's going to be in Minneapolis in the States, in Minnesota. And there's going to be it's basically a convergence of all kinds of different stakeholders. I think, and I could have the narrative a little bit wrong preceding it, but the sense that I've gotten since kind of becoming a part of the community again was that there might have been kind of a break between the sort of direction of science and how research is applied and all that, and the Tourette community itself.
Okay.
And what does the Tourette community want, and how can research? What's the agenda? And are we talking more medication? Are we talking alternatives? And so all these stakeholders are going to get together. People with TS, their caregivers, doctors, scientists, like we're all going to be together talking about this. There are going to be different sessions. And there's going to be a big focus on what's called CBIT, or Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention for Tics, which is a non-medication way of getting people to think of competing responses or competing thoughts that precede the tics that they have as a way of trying to neutralize your motor tics. It doesn't work quite as well with vocal tics from what I understand, but it's something that a lot more people need to know about as an option, because medication doesn't always work out for people. I think sometimes people get frustrated with it, but the summit is going to talk about all these things and maybe how we can get CBIT into to more minds in the medical community, people who are qualified enough to administer it, because even people who want to have access to it, I think there might even be insurance questions with it, but this all kind of aims to kind of go in this direction of improving all of this for everybody.
Yeah. Do you know if there's been one of these summits before? Is this something that's happened in the past, or is this a new summit that's come about? Or
this summit, as it's designed, I think is kind of a I don't know if it's the very first of its kind, but it is a special occasion separate from the annual conferences and that kind of thing. So all the Tourette associations, they'll have their annual conference where everybody gets together, all the membership, and there'll be speakers, and they'll talk about new research and science and all that. But this is a little bit more of a huddle, I guess you could say, to actually achieve something on an agenda.
Yeah, like a focus group type thing.
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of. Yeah. We had a comment in the chat from Adam from Odd Dad Out. He said, I feel like the public image of TS is similar to how people see OCD. They know of one fringe symptom without knowing how it actually manifests and affects people.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, so the one thing I think is kind of easy to parodize, I guess, is why people kind of think about it in a one-dimensional way or kind of a narrow way. And there's not much incentive, I guess, on the part of people who are not impacted by it daily to learn more about it themselves. So I do like the fact that there are more people talking about it now. There are more shows on television. there are mixed opinions as to, whether they're good or bad, or if the portrayal is right or wrong. But I think at least there's a more mature approach to the conversation happening now. And I hope that continues. I don't know. I mean, with the podcast kind of being, excuse me, kind of being an open forum for people to kind of talk about things openly without any sort of sensational slant. I'm hoping that people who don't have TS, and I've heard from at least one person, who has written in saying that I thought this was going to be like a funny podcast or something.
Okay.
And I ended up listening to the whole episode as a random episode I picked, but it ended up being an education when it was being sort of approached as a joke, and that was cool. That was a really cool twist.
Yeah, I think that it's the way things are happening, like you're saying, whether they're good or not good, and hopefully it helps open up dialogue. Hopefully more good things come out of it, so that it is represented in a better way, that the education continues. And on the note of kind of conventions and gatherings, Jade said, are you aware of any big gatherings or conventions for TS in Canada? Because they are often in the US.
I do know Tourette Canada has its annual conference coming up in Winnipeg, and I think that is mid-October. I don't want to get the exact dates wrong, but I know Tourette.ca does have that info, and I think it's the first thing you see when you get to their website. But yeah, that's coming up in a couple months, I think.
Yeah. Have there been connections made with people in the Tourette's discussion group who maybe, I don't know if they share where they're from or based, but little collections of people that find community within the group there?
Yeah. Actually, it kind of worked out that way for me, because even into the third season of the podcast, I had still never talked with anybody else who had Tourette syndrome in person. Mm-hmm. Always over the phone. If I'd run into anybody else who had Tourette syndrome before that, I didn't know it. It was just somebody else out there on the street. The only exception to that is in episode 0 of season 1, when I just randomly, I'm doing a man on the street type thing. And I'm asking just random people, like, what do you know about Tourette syndrome? What's the definition to you? And then I run into one random guy, and he's like, oh, I have Tourette's. And I mean, he was actually the first person I talked to on the street, was a guy who claimed to have Tourette syndrome, and he seemed totally sincere. We talked for like 30 seconds, and that was about it. But with the discussion group, someone from my area reached out to me and said, we have a local support group. We would love it if you came out and talked. And I did, and it ended up being the first time that I talked to anybody else in my adult life with Tourette syndrome, and I left like crying. I mean, it was amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
Not only that, but I got to meet a good number of people who I think are going to be part of the podcast, cool. Kind of going forward, and then Kimmy, who was in season 2 or season 3. It was season 3. Initially, when I think I was first interacting with her on Twitter, I didn't know she lived in the same town I worked in, which is 30 minutes down the road from where I am right now. But I got to meet her in person. I mean, it was just really, really cool, just making those connections. And then, but to answer your question, I mean, for other people in the group, yeah, it's definitely happened. And I love that it's people who are not just from my area, not just from the US, not just from Canada, but it really is all over the world. And I think we're 275 would be the next benchmark, which I think is pretty good for how long or short of a period of time the discussion group has been around. For anybody who wants to join, please answer the 3 questions that you get hit with, because we just got to make sure you're not a bot, you're not a troll. But yeah, it's a really, really cool place, and everybody's very supportive and mature, and it's a closed group, so you can have the freedom to talk openly, and nobody's gonna pop in and make fun or, share your privacy or anything like that.
Yeah, it is important. It's good that you have the 3 questions there as kind of like an entry point to make sure that the person is going to be a valuable part of the group in a way that you can, I guess, just screening them for not being a bot, because you do want it to be a safe place where people can share. And the closed group thing is awesome, and I'm glad those connections have happened for you and for others. That's amazing. And yeah, hope the community grows there and more people discover it. I have a link to that in the links at the end of this stream that we're going to do for anyone who doesn't know. We did have the eldest bro say, I don't feel it was to the same degree, but I do feel I got the same treatment once my classmates found out I had dyslexia and how I started to fall behind in school.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another good example of something that just kind of has a name, and then people kind of have that they attach just whatever their minimal narrow view of it is. And it's, I think, maybe kind of disregarded, cheapened, kind of not taken quite as seriously. But dyslexia is, I mean, that's another thing people say. Like if someone curses or hits their hand and says a curse word, the joke will be, oh, sorry, that was my Tourette's or something like that. People use OCD the same way, and I think people use dyslexia the same way. Like, oh, I'm totally dyslexic, or if they stumble when they're reading or something like that. It's just that these little tiny micro kind of inconsiderations that kind of add up, I think.
I will just have to pause you there. I think our stream died for a second. I'm really sorry about that. They might have missed just the segment that you were just saying. Thanks, Elders, for letting me know. I did see that something popped up, but wasn't sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if you can recap what you just said.
Yeah, I think I was just kind of saying that a lot of people treat Tourette syndrome and OCD and dyslexia kind of the same way, in that I think they kind of have a narrow view of it and kind of don't take it quite as seriously, and it ends up being more of a joke, in the sense of and these are tiny jokes and maybe people don't mean anything by them, but it does kind of sting when the perpetuation is, I hit I'm hammering a nail into the wall and I hit my thumb and I curse, and then I say, oh God, I got Tourette's today, or something like that. It's the kind of thing that you hear people say, oh, I must be dyslexic if they're reading something and they stumble on it, or it's just that kind of thing. There are a number of those things that people really truly deal with that get, I think, kind of cheapened in their perception.
Yeah. So it's awesome that there's an opportunity for people to share their real experiences and to bring more awareness and do it in a way that is genuine and not sort of destigmatizing it, like you say, and letting people know that it's okay to share. Bandrew from Podcastage, Geeks Rising, is in
Bandrew.
the chat and said, hey, Ben and Heather. Yeah. Naya asked, are you worried about passing TS onto your kids?
Well, but I don't have any kids as of yet, and don't know kind of what my life trajectory is going to be, because right now it doesn't include a plan for kids, except for taking care of other young family members that we currently help to look after. They're kind of our family in that regard, so there's no real genetic connection in that way. But I do, when I'm interviewing other people, there's actually one coming up that there was a family revelation, but it's, and for anybody who doesn't know, I mean, TS, there is a genetic aspect of it. Sometimes it will run, it will, a father will have it, his son will have it. I haven't spotted it precisely elsewhere in my family. There are some other things that I've spotted in my family, but not TS specifically. But that is something I've kind of, I guess, gently asked any parents that I've interviewed on the show. Like, are you, you have a 2-year-old son or something. Have you been observing him? Are you worried? Are you kind of, but at the same time, a parent who has TS, well, first off, any parent of somebody with TS who is supportive is amazing. I mean, that's the best thing you can possibly do. Just be cool to your son or daughter who, for whatever they're going through, just don't tell them to stop ticking. Don't, just be a supporter and be their friend. If you have TS and you know what it's been like, and you do have children and one of them ends up having a tic disorder, you're in an amazing position to be kind of a guiding light for them and help them through the frustration, and that totally bears out with so many people I've talked to who do have kids who have TS and have it themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, like you said, it's amazing to be supportive in that case. And I have a friend whose son has other issues, and she is the most laid back person in the whole entire world. She's just rolling with their journey, and it really helps both of them, because it's not easy, perhaps, and it's a whole thing to navigate on how to keep them safe and do all of those things, or whatever you need to do to help them along their journey. So, yeah, it's good to be able to hear how that it might impact other people, but to know that there is support out there for you if you're going through that as well. Andrew asked, I don't know if this was covered already, but what connections have you made, artistic or interpersonal, that have helped you with TS, Ben?
So since starting the podcast, it's been really cool how many people I've run into who are also musicians, have similar backgrounds. There've been some really funny coincidences too. Chris Clem from season 1, we kind of found, we were into similar kinds of music, and we were talking about bands we played in back in the day. And it turns out one of my old bands played a show with one of his bandmates, like way, way, way back when. And this is really random. They're from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'm from North Carolina. And I think they were on tour. We played a date with them, and they really stuck out in our memory, or at least mine, because I really enjoyed them. And I was like, hey, you're from Salt Lake City. Do you remember this band? And he was like, you're kidding me. Like, I play with that guy. Like, he's my bandmate. Just really funny connections like that. I don't know. There will be a continuation of the musical theme of the podcast in season 4. There's a drummer named Mike Miller who I just interviewed the other night. It's fantastic, really positive guy. And his drumming is a really great connection, a great way to kind of mentor other kids who are also into music, especially drumming. They reach out to him. They kind of see him as a role model. There's been a lot of stuff like that. It's been fun.
Cool. And just, I wanted to go back to the kids thing about being a champion. If you had TS and you know how it is for them, then you can kind of be a bit of a champion for them and understand more of the journey that they're going on. Who has been a champion for you, Ben?
Oh man, so when I was a little kid, some of the adults with TS, it was, so I would go to Tourette syndrome conferences when I was a kid. My mom was very active with the Tourette Association of America used to be called the Tourette Syndrome Association, or TSA, way back in the day. So in the 80s and early 90s, we would go to these conferences in different cities every year. And for one, that was an amazing frame of reference for me, not knowing really anybody, in my circle of friends or my childhood who had TS and knew where I was coming from. Mm-hmm. Then being in a place where there's like 1,000 people who are all dealing with the same thing in different ways. Meeting some of the adults who were cool enough to reach out to me and at least shake my hand and ask me what I was interested in. I was an 8 or 9 year old kid. But Shane Festel, he's from Canada, just super warm, really supportive, fantastic. Steve Bachner from Boston. They're kind of like the old guard of TS, and they are amazing advocates and heroes for me. Just because, they're cool, they're funny, they're smart. Just things I wanted to see.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, just being compassionate enough to hang out for a minute and talk to me as a little kid. Didn't know what I was going through. Didn't know what the future was going to hold for me. And these guys were cool enough to kind of make that statement for me that things are going to be all right. And with the podcast, a lot of people who listen to are parents of kids who've been newly diagnosed. Mm-hmm. And so I think they kind of tune in, kind of hearing what the outlook might be. And to get basic information too, but just how are these people living their lives? What are we talking about? That kind of thing. So I think that ends up being kind of a hopeful example for people to find with the podcast. But that was completely me passing on what people like Shane Festel and Steve Bachner did for me. Jim Eisenreich is another one. He was a professional baseball player. Mm-hmm. Played with the Kansas City Royals and the Twins and Minnesota Twins and the Philadelphia Phillies. Another guy, just, autographed baseball. It's sitting around here somewhere. But cool, yeah, just cool, laid back heroes. They don't make a big thing out of it. They're just kind of, they exist. It's nice to know that they're there. Yeah. Because they're a great frame of reference for what you could be.
Cool. That is awesome. On the note of upcoming things, in season 4, Naya asks, are you going to interview some more kids?
Yeah, that's the plan. Not only that, but I want to explore some other tic disorders too. Mm-hmm. It's Tourette syndrome is going to remain the focus of the show because that's what a lot of people tune in, so to speak, to hear specifically about. But because the life experiences may be very similar for other people who have tic disorders that may be very pronounced but aren't exactly Tourette syndrome, because there are other kinds of tic disorders. I want to kind of pick their brain and kind of hear their perspective on this. And, I've heard from people saying that I feel like I don't count with the Tourette community because I don't have a TS diagnosis. I have a different kind of a provisional tic, a different kind of tic disorder. And I don't feel like I have community, and that really sucks. And so I want to talk to those people too, because they should have community. The lived experience is not necessarily any different from mine. And there may be, a lot of commonalities that we can find with each other. So yeah. So kids, I mean, the whole thing is just to keep the podcast as diverse as possible, because there are so many different walks of life that will have a different answer to the same question that I could be asking everybody.
Yeah. Everyone has their own unique journey and experiences, but they are all valid, they are all important, and you all matter. And Kate, who we had on for the launch of the Sunshine Summit, that is her motto and her theme, is that you matter. And I just want to let everyone know here that they do. You all matter. And being able to hear their stories is really important. Banjo agreed that your interview with the 12-year-old, I think it was so amazing. Hearing Ben and the boy's mother be so supportive was really touching.
Oh yeah, that's cool. And that was Liam. His mother Sarah is awesome. I mean, the parental support is really, really cool. He's a really smart kid. He really stood out to me because talking to people with TS, the sort of creative side of the brain, the artistic music side of the brain is usually what the conversation goes into. He is sort of a math and physics type, science type guy, and which is a little bit different from other people I've talked to, but that's the important thing about just talking to a diversity of people. But at the same time, I think, because this episode in particular, I was talking with him and I was kind of switching back between him and his mom, but I think his mom laid out a really good roadmap for how to be supportive to a kid with TS and maybe having a difficult time dealing with it, but here's what you do. And there were people who wrote in after the fact, after that episode came out, saying that they learned something from it. They really liked her example. She's supportive, attentive, but not overbearing. When a big thing about having TS is needing that room to breathe, and so she had it down, and it was cool to hear from her.
That is cool. Naya just wanted to say goodnight. She wanted to thank you for helping her, and hope you continue the podcast
so
for
much.
a long time.
Yeah, great to hear from you. Thank you.
The diversity of stories and just hearing the stories, I wanted to point out, is building that repository of like a toolkit, different experiences to help you along the way that you can pick up from and try different things along the way. So that's really, really cool. Jade asked, could you speak to invasive thoughts?
Yeah. And I deal with that sometimes. I mean, the intrusive thoughts of, anxiety is something I deal with, and I've been, I'm not sure if I'm answering Jade appropriately, but anxiety has been a big part of my life, and that went unmedicated for a very long time. And intrusive thoughts can be a very bad thing. And I'm not a big fan of sleeping anyway. I like staying up and doing things, but they can keep you up, and they can kind of ruin a totally normal situation. And I've since gone back on medication just to kind of, mellow those things out. But I'm trying to remember, there was one episode where I interviewed somebody who had something that was called maladaptive daydreaming, where they would have these long scenarios that they would play out in their heads. And I think they would go into negative territories, and you would almost kind of experience or have the same takeaway of an argument or some sort of conflict that is more or less contrived in your mind. And I may be describing, again, I'm not a doctor, I may be describing that a little bit off. This is based on what she was telling me, but I kind of feel like I deal with a little bit of that sometimes. I have these long drives to work, and I'll have these internal conversations, and sometimes I'll foresee a problem, maybe with a piece of work I'm doing or something like that, and I'll just spin it in my head and play it and go almost like a risk management exercise, where I'm trying to find the flaws and the holes and the conflicts, and what someone who's against it might say to me to, how am I going to counter them? And it's kind of exhausting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't deal with it quite as much as other people do. I used to, for sure. But I mean, Jade, was I speaking to it the right way? I don't know if you can answer in the chat or not. I hope so.
Yeah. What are some of the things in your toolkit that you have that help you along the way with anything with those negative thoughts or anything else?
Well, one thing that, because I've dealt with depression too, and one thing, and this may not be the most appropriate way to say it or talk about it, and certainly won't work for everybody. But one thought that it's almost like I have it like written down on a piece of paper in my mind is that when I'm kind of going into these dark, depressed, kind of like a valley type moment, I'll just keep telling myself like, this is fake, and I know for a fact that once I get through this, on the other side of this, I'm going to feel great, because that's always the way it works. Is I just feel totally down, and everything's dark and dim, and as soon as that lifts somehow, I don't know if it's just that I feel normal again, and the contrast with that kind of accentuates and heightens how good that feels to kind of feel normal again, but it feels great, whatever it is. And so I try to keep that in mind. And I have to reach in to remember to think about that when I'm going through an anxious situation. Yeah. But that's one thing that it works, at least for me. I have no idea if that's going to work for anybody else.
Yeah, it can be a little bit hard to draw on the sort of light within us to kind of draw us out of the dark moments. But I think the more sort of support network we have around us and all of the different things that we can use to remember those moments or help draw us out, whatever we can reach out for help, ask for help, whatever works, is really important.
Right.
Jade said there's a more prominent type where it's often a negative movie or story. So for Jade, if I drive over a bridge, the brain may say that's going to collapse, and I can almost play it out. Or walking in the mall and a police officer in front of me, the brain always says, just gently tap their hip by their holster, it'll be funny. Then it plays out. In reality, no, not funny at all, and I don't do it, but my TS throws it up as an invasive, intrusive thought.
I do that kind of thing all the time. The subway platform thing, it's like just kind of being on the edge of something that you could, conceivably do something negative with. And I do that all the time. I play that out in my head all the time. Or it's like, this is going to sound horrible, but one of the things, and it kind of makes me like, I think I probably visibly wince when I do it, is, this is going to sound so weird, but if I'm talking to a person I really, really respect, there's this one thing I do, and the thought just, it outruns me. I don't, I feel like it's not coming from me, but the thing I picture is me punching them in the face of somebody I really, really respect. And that's the scenario that goes through my mind of like, what's going to happen? What are people around me going to do? What are they going to think happened? Ben's a nice guy. He wouldn't do something like that. Like I will play that scenario out. And I do that, I think, kind of daily on autopilot in a way, not to where I would ever have the urge to actually do something like that. But that's one of these things where it's just your brain creates a picture for you, and there it is.
Yeah. That would be very tricky. It's tricky navigating things without having those kinds of thoughts. I think that that might be more common than we realize when people don't talk about it as much, that they have those kind of thoughts. So again, having the conversations about it and sharing it and shedding a light on it, if you like, to bring them out, might help people feel that they're not alone in that. I do want to just quickly round up because we're coming up to the end of the session. But if anyone else has any final questions, comments, or thoughts, or anything they want to share with Ben, please do so. One thing that I do like to ask people throughout this thing is, do you have any favorite nature connections, Ben?
Well, so with photography being such a thing for me, and this is from an audio connection too, I wish I had it in reaching distance, but I do a lot of stereo field recordings, rain, birds, that sort of thing. And it's just for the, I do a separate podcast for my employer, and I did an episode about sound and city soundscapes and what they can tell us about a city, how sound affects policy and ordinances and regulations and things like that. But as an exercise with that, I went out and recorded all kinds of stuff, just birds in my backyard, water, from a brook, that sort of thing. And just that act of doing that was like, it's I think you were talking about this with Chris, where it kind of like a forest bathing or something like that, where you just kind of extract yourself. Even though I'm holding a piece of technology, going into a digital recorder, I'm not thinking of it that way. And I do feel kind of removed from the sort of day to day and the asphalt and the bricks and all that. I'm kind of removed from that in a place where all I'm hearing is nature, and I'm intently listening to it because that's the job.
Yeah.
Same thing from a photography perspective. I don't know anything about birds, nothing. I know what a blue jay is and a cardinal is, and I can identify those, but like anything deeper than that, I know nothing. But it's been coming on where I feel like I'm about to be an avid birder because I've sort of developed this connection with photographing birds and dragonflies. Wow. And so it's been a lot of fun to kind of do that and kind of observe their behavior, try to get some predictability with it. Like, okay, so I know they're about to do this based on what they did last time, or this dragonfly is sitting on this branch. He's going to hop over 2 feet because that's what they keep doing, or they're going to go down this line. Or, I mean, what I'm saying makes sense at all, but being able to tap in and make that connection is really, really fun and free and easy and really just kind of rewarding, just in the sense of like, I guess, kind of like ease and calm that you have when you're done with it. And it's fun to do. But yeah, those are my nature connections. And I think they're kind of fledgling in a way. No pun intended.
Well, that is awesome. I think being in the moment, because you're, like you said, actively listening and actively being there to try and capture those moments, you're completely absorbed in it. And that's incredible. I like to take pictures of really small things that people wouldn't notice and arbitrary things that you just kind of pass by and don't take for granted, I guess. Andrew did mention it, and I was thinking of it as you were saying about the birding. I've got 2 connections that might be possible for you in the future that you might want to look at. Casual Birder podcast with Susie Buttress is a really cool one to listen to.
I started following them.
Yay!
Yeah. I started following Casual Birder. That's a great connection.
Cool. And on Twitch, there is Damien Explores, and he does live streams of birding and bird identification streams, and he is incredible too. I've connected with him over the last year, and so if anyone else wants to connect with those.
Yeah, that's new to me, so I'll check that out.
Cool. Anna Christine said, do you feel especially in touch with your sense of touch?
Not especially, unless there's something more specific that she has in mind. Okay. I will say, yeah, in the sense that there are certain textures that have combined themselves with certain tics I've had in the past, like touching the end of my hair. I'll just take like a handful of hair or something, and like the end of it would have this, like, it was a tic, like it was something that like I was doing all day. A lot of this was when I was younger, but there are certain textures that have a payoff, I guess, and I think that kind of influences certain tics I have. This is why I like doing the podcast, because I had never really talked about that, I guess, before, and this is maybe the first time I'm trying to like figure out even what I'm doing or what I'm thinking or what, like what was that thing with my hair and this texture.
Yeah.
But in that sense, yeah.
Cool. So it's kind of helping you explore your own journey through the podcast, really.
Oh yeah. I mean, the like cathartic is like the word that always tends to come out with these things, but it's again, going back to the word isolation and the sort of lifting and thawing of isolation, and knowing that certain tics that I have, or certain traits that I have that I thought were completely just limited to me, I'm a weirdo and nobody else has it. And then come to find out that, there's a whole legion of people who come from the same place and do the same things, and they all thought they were the only people to do it until we all got together and started talking about it. Yeah.
That's cool. Tim has 2 questions. What's your favorite music to listen to, and what's your favorite music to write?
Music to listen to. My background is more like punk rock and indie rock and that kind of thing. So growing up in North Carolina, I was really lucky, especially the time period that I was growing up, when I kind of discovered, I guess, like underground music. Would have been the early to mid 90s. And by the mid 90s, I was seeing all my favorite bands, from Chapel Hill. There was like Polvo and Superchunk and Erectus Monotone, and I mean, so many great bands that come out of that area that I was fortunate to have enough to have essentially 1 or 2 degrees of separation from.
Cool.
Small 23. I mean, just these old school North Carolina bands that I guess kind of informed everything that I would do after that. My favorite band is called Rocket from the Crypt. They were from San Diego, but so yeah, just loud, abrasive, brash type stuff that I tend to listen to. A lot of 60s garage rock as well, because I like some of the connections that those things have. The sort of like less commercial, more raw sound, kind of a cheaper recording kind of quality, but you get character with it, that sort of thing. And subsequently, I like to record that way too. I don't like super clean, pristine quality. I like it when, who was it? David Lee Roth, I think, was on Mark Maron or one of these podcasts recently where he used the term wawasabe, and that stuck with me. And he said that it's I think it's a Japanese word, where he said it means something that's perfect because it's a little bit messed up. And I kind of like to treat my projects that way, to have them have a little bit of rough edging, and imperfection, and maybe even some like ratty quality, just to kind of give it some character. And so that's the stuff I like to record.
Awesome. That is very cool. Tim had the sort of rock hands in the chat there for you, metal hands. There's been a lot of amazing connections of people who've come by the live chat. So I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who managed to participate in the live chat with us, to Jade and Anna Christine and Naya and Adam, Banju, Eldest, Anthony, Finn was here earlier. And if I missed you, Chris Parsons. Thank you all so much for coming by. I want to wrap up here. People are really grateful for the Tourette's podcast and what you do. I am really honored to be connected with you, like I said at the beginning, and be a part of Geeks Rising with you. Bandrew wanted to let you know how amazing your show is. It's taught him so much, and I'm so happy that he is so happy that you're able to connect. And the whole theme of Geeks Rising is like Geeks Rising Up. We're all trying to share valuable, helpful, educational things, and we're a part of a community together now, which is amazing. So thank you very much for your time today, Ben, to share some of your connection stories. Again, thank you to everyone in the live chat.
And thanks everybody. And thanks to you for everything you've done. Thanks to Bandrew and Geeks Rising for kind of helping with the awareness. And I mean, it's gone a long way with me.
Cool.
And I'm grateful.
That's awesome. All the best for the summit later this week that you're going to. Safe travels, and I hope that all goes really well and is really productive and just has good things that come from it. And the rest of the Geeks Rising crew will be getting together later this week, and if anyone can catch that one, that would be cool. But hopefully we'll be able to catch you as part of the Geeks Rising team a little bit later on. We've got something we're hopefully working towards. So thank you, everyone, again. For anyone who doesn't know, we'll just drop to this screen here. We have the links to connect with Ben. If you ever haven't already, there's Tourette's Pod on Twitter, Tourette's Podcast on Instagram. Search for the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook, and there's tourettespodcast.com. You can also find the podcast on geeksrising.com, and myself and the other members of Geeks Rising will probably share it out there as well. So, yeah. Cool. Jade says thank you for all that you do. Bandrew says you're both so amazing, and SM7B hype.
Nice. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Standing with Bandrew on the microphone.
Yeah. Yeah. Until next time, everybody, be empowered by nature. you.